This is Hidden Killers Live with Tony Bruschi, Stacey Cole, and Todd Michaels.
Let's move on to another case that we've been covering and watching for quite some time. It's turned into another maze of contradictions. We have a young woman missing for over a year, found decomposed and partially dismembered, allegedly, in the front trunk of a Tesla belonging to artist David, D4VD. We have early reporting talking about freezing and storage, and now the LAPD is trying to correct the record, saying her remains were not frozen when the car was opened. We have a sealed autopsy, a grand jury meeting behind closed doors, and still all these weeks later, nobody is in custody. So today, Jennifer Coffendaff, a retired FBI special agent, is joining us to break all of this down. When you saw just last week a grand jury has been convened, allegedly on this, what's your reaction to that?
This is such a huge piece of information, and this is why. There are multiple ways to charge an individual: via complaint, via criminal information, and via indictment. They have chose to go, if you will, the indictment route. Now, just because you have a grand jury doesn't mean this grand jury, despite what everybody says about ham sandwiches, it doesn't mean that they're going to indict. Sometimes they issue a true bill, sometimes a no bill, and sometimes it's never even brought to that question. The prosecutor just themselves says, okay, I don't really have enough here. And they're never asked to answer the question whether they've committed a crime or not. These grand juries, although if this was a specially appointed grand jury, would only be hearing this case. But if it's hearing more cases, cases just keep coming in and keep coming in. They hear this bit for a half an hour and that bit for a half an hour. I don't know if people really understand how grand juries work. But nevertheless, the fact that they have decided to go the grand jury route and not go via a criminal complaint, that is big, or an information, considering that he's represented. So it tells me the strength of their case, they're letting the grand jury ferret that out.
But do we know if this grand jury being convened has anything to do with potential charges against David? I mean, they could be against really anybody or anyone behind the scenes that we may know about or not know about as of right now. Could it not? I mean, David's name may not even be on their tongues when they're having these discussions.
Well, certainly it's a possibility, but I guess I've been pretty transparent that I think that David is involved in some way, shape, or form in this from all the information we have. I mean, and there's a lot of breadcrumbs that lead straight to David, but that doesn't mean others aren't involved. And I think it's very likely that one or more people are involved in this. I've said it from the beginning. This is just too huge of a crime, just the dismemberment of a body for this little bitty 5'2" guy to perpetrate on his own that, barely touches grass. I mean, his whole life is behind an internet computer.
Yeah.
If there's multiple people involved here, you're talking about a conspiracy of some sort of group of people involved in hiding this body. Are you surprised that there has not been any sort of leakage of this yet, that there's not one person, if we are talking multiple people involved here, that not one has cracked as of yet, spoken up and said, hey, here's what's going on? I would think there'd be some incentive as well right now. I'm a little bit surprised, unless maybe this is going on behind the scenes, that there hasn't been some encouragement of this, of if you know something about this, let us go. Some sort of immunity deals maybe being cut for someone that can open up the floodgates on what the hell is actually going on here.
Well, two things to your question. First of all, number one, I am shocked we're not hearing more scuttle. You can take any other case we have, the, Kepner case, the case we just discussed. Any case in true crime right now, there's so much scuttlebutt, rumors, things that we hear. We are really hear very little on this case from his entourage, from his closest associates. And that to me is shocking if one of them is involved, unless one of them who is involved has lawyered up and is providing information to law enforcement and to this grand jury.
I was just going to say that. I wonder if somebody is listening to counsel for the first time ever, or somebody's actually listening to their attorney when they say, keep your yap shut. And maybe they are.
Well, David certainly is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or is it not snitching?
That's another big deal. I will say this, in certain communities, like one of them is in the gang community. For instance, I know you all know about the Stockton, big shootout that took place, and 4 dead. At least one was a child, maybe more. 11 others injured. It was just this huge gangland shooting, and 2 rappers, I think were involved in that. But nevertheless, I bring this up because at least last I looked, there's still no suspect. They're interviewing all these people, and it is so true in working gangs. Nobody knows anything. I'm telling you, they don't know. Oh, we didn't see that car. Oh, they walked in your front door without masks. And you didn't see, nope, have no idea who they are. Can't describe it either. And that's because in the gang world, gangs take care of their own deals, right? The retaliation will follow because of this, big time. It's coming. But in this case, when you have this community of music, the music industry and the entertainment business, and this subculture of a guy who literally, per his own admissions, his life was sort of these people, on the internet, in his, small entourage. Maybe they keep quiet like gang members.
It makes you wonder, of keeping this secret quiet as to where it is, or is there more going on behind the scenes that we are just not aware of right now? That I guess time will tell on. The fact that the grand jury they had convened one last week. How far out do you think it's going to be before we see charges against somebody or something happening here in terms of legal action? Obviously, it's illegal to have a body in the trunk of your car. That right there is a crime. Doesn't mean that David killed her or anything like that. But you own the car and there's a body in it. Their charges would likely come at some point to some degree, I would think. Where do you think we are in anything like that taking place?
Well, when you look at that, right, it's really who had care, custody, and control of that vehicle that's the problem. And from what we know, the person who parked that car there was very describable. They weren't masked. They were in clothing that was very telling, and that was seen later. That person was seen later in that clothing. So it is no secret to law enforcement, in my opinion, who parked that car. They know that. And so from that standpoint, it is riddle me this. Why hasn't that person, woman, female, we don't know, male, been brought in? And I would say we don't know that they haven't. And because just last week, all of that autopsy information, do you remember this? It's kind of funny because I looked and I saw that all of a sudden we couldn't see any information. I don't know if you saw this, and I posted that on Twitter. I was like, all of a sudden we can't see the information. And I said, I bet you they pulled that down and sealed that, because that does happen. Then all of a sudden they pulled it down and sealed it. And I only bring this up to say, if they sealed that, everything is on lockdown. In other words, if there is what we call an information filed, because say somebody is cooperating and they have an attorney involved and they filed what we call a criminal information, that's where people are actually cooperating. And it's just done attorney to the office, the DA to that attorney. If something like that was negotiated or was done, that's going to be so sealed up, so tight, we're going to have no idea it happened.
Interesting.
Yeah. We're also the medical examiner, that information. We have the LAPD saying this, the medical examiner saying this or not saying this. When it comes to other areas of this case, the frozen aspect of it, frozen versus not frozen. There's been a lot of confusion there. A lot of reporting last week coming out saying that inside sources said that the body had been frozen. LAPD saying the body was not frozen when we found it. I'm curious as to where you stand on this, because we were talking about this last week off the air. We were texting about this. I feel like both can exist simultaneously. When I first heard, the body was partially frozen, I didn't really think that they took it out of the frunk and it was still, crispy like a turkey. I thought, oh, there's signs that it had been frozen. Like if you froze a strawberry and then take that out, you are going to oh, I can tell the difference between a fresh strawberry and a non-fresh one that's been frozen, even if they're both room temperature. It's just the crystallization and all that will expand and then will mess with the muscle and the tissue. Can the two be simultaneously true, where maybe she was frozen, but when she was found, obviously thawed out, was not at that moment? Is that really a contradictory thing that was reported, or is it just two people talking about two different moments in the history of that corpse?
We did go back and forth about that because it made a lot of sense to me that if she really died sometime in the spring, which is what's being inferred here, and again, if we believe the PI, he said there's no pictures of her past the end of January or first, I think it's the first week of February. If you look at that, what did he do with that body, or what did they, whoever's involved in this, do with that body for that period of time? So it makes all the sense in the world to me that this body would have been frozen. Yeah. Something done to slow down decomposition, to until you decided what you're going to do to it. And you and I talked about this a long time ago as well. It makes no sense to me that you're keeping a body around this amount of time, unless it's something much more sinister for why you're keeping it around. Because you could throw it in the woods, you could throw it in the river, you could throw it in the ocean. There's a lot of places you can do. And if you're willing to cut up a body, which again, I thought it was very interesting. The medical examiner said she wasn't decapitated and she wasn't frozen, but said nothing about whether she was cut up, whether her limbs were removed or not. I thought that was a very interesting point that he, to me, purposefully did not make. And I got to tell you, Tony, these issues between the medical examiner's office and the law enforcement agency, the LAPD, really tease me off, because all of this gets in the way of justice for Celeste. It does. And the fact that they can't play in the sandbox together, there's so much wrong with that. I can't even say it. And TMZ doubled down, by the way, that indeed the fingers were frozen and wrinkly, when you get out of pool and they're wrinkled up, and that the body was partially frozen when extracted. So they've doubled down on their claims.
Do we know who their source was?
No, but they say ME's office. Somebody quote close with me. So they don't have the law enforcement source. They have the ME source. So you have basically, you see this breakdown, which my understanding were there were issues. And let's face it, law enforcement and ME's offices have issues a lot. Look at the Greenberg case. Look at the Karen Reed case. There's so many cases, because a lot of times forensic examiners are, this, of course, I'm coming from law enforcement. They're milquetoast. Half the time they just spew out a bunch of facts and won't come to a conclusion. And it's infuriating. Was this a homicide or was it an accident? And half the time you get undetermined. And that's if you're lucky. Look at Greenberg. She doesn't even get it undetermined.
Yeah.
So, the bottom line is these instances occur so much more often than I think people realize. And we're seeing it play out right now from what I can tell.
How does it make any sense that because I know TMZ is doubling down on this, that the fingers were frozen. How? I mean, that would mean that the body was not in that trunk very long. If it was still frozen in some way, shape, or form, it wouldn't take long for a body to get fully thawed out in that kind of heat. Probably less than a day, I'm going to guess. I'm basing this on thawing turkeys. I mean, seriously. But that, I mean, I can't imagine that body would still be frozen unless it just freshly was removed from a freezer and thrown into that trunk. But I guess, there could be the possibility that there had been multiple movements of this body from trunk to freezer and freezer to frunk and frunk to freezer. I mean, it may not have just been, this has been in this frunk for all that super long. I could see it, well, let's move her here, let's move her there. And maybe this was a moment of transition. I don't know.
See, that just doesn't make any sense to me from the photos we see of that vehicle, from the ticketing history on that vehicle, from the information from the cameras.
Yeah.
Relayed to us from the PI. Purportedly, that car was parked on July 29th and was not moved again to September. And unless people went back and forth about every other day and put dry ice on that car.
That's what I was going to say next. Like, did they dry ice the trunk? I mean, maybe. I don't.
And refresh, because
they're dealing with heat.
Going to last maybe 2 days.
Yeah.
And also just thinking about, we just came off Thanksgiving. You think about your bird that you thaw out. Wouldn't the fingers probably de-thaw or thaw, I'm sort of faster than other parts of the body? Because they're smaller, right? So that doesn't make any sense to me.
I would think if you're going to have any part that's still frozen, it would be like the cavity, like the larger piece of, because it just like with cooking, it however deep you get, that's going to be more frozen if it's a solid freeze, or it takes that longer to cook if you're cooking something there too, because it's further into the cavity or the body of whatever it is we're talking about. In this case, it's a human being. It doesn't make any sense. There's no way that body was frozen if it had been sitting in that frunk for all that time. It defies the laws of physics.
Well, and that's what the LAPD is saying. I mean, they were pretty forceful. Not decapitated, not frozen. Mm-hmm. And here we are as, in the true crime community, doing our best to try to make this case make any sort of sense. Mm-hmm. And it's not making any sense. I mean, are we to believe that literally the person in charge of the homicide and robbery unit at LAPD is just lying to us? I mean, that's a flat out lie. It's in quotes at that. That is what he said. So either he's lying, or now, as you and I talked about this, Tony, we have a source that would have heard information from the ME's office, and then that source would have relayed it to TMZ, and then TMZ, and we all know what happens in the telephone game, even if it's just 2 layers. And he said he went back and double checked, and that source said unequivocally, I think he said he quadrupled double down, or so he said he quadrupled down, that's the facts. My whole thing is, how important is it? Let's really think about this. Is it how important to the investigation, whether she was frozen, whether her fingers were wrinkled, or whether she wasn't? How important is that really? It's a fact, and it's somewhat important, but I more want to know, what in the hell happened to that girl? How long has she been gone? And was she murdered? Was this an accident and a cover-up? I tell you, I say it's foul play. I'm 1,000% sure. Nobody covers up an accident by dismembering somebody, because I still think she was dismembered.
Yeah, I mean, and I think it speaks to the interpretation of the information of how, when you're playing the telephone game, that's why I think the two can coexist. I believe maybe someone said, it looks like there's signs that she was frozen, and somebody took that as she was frozen out of the trunk. Right. And no, maybe not, but there certainly would be signs. I don't know. I don't know how your fingers look after being frozen, thawed, and then in a trunk for weeks, if you'd still have that sort of pruning going on. I have no idea how that works, but I would imagine that there's something to do with the interpretation of the information that is inaccurate. And how important is it? At the big picture of things, probably not super, but it does speak to the covering up of a crime, if that's indeed what was going on here. The intention, the intent to maintain this corpse out of sight, out of mind of anyone else that would realize you're calling a corpse around. But at the end, does it matter? Other than that aspect, probably not much.
I just meant whether the finger, whether she had some signs of freezing when she was found, or whether she was just frozen throughout, prior to that. I all I can tell you is this, is the LAPD isn't going to make that determination. A doctor, that the pathologist is, the ME's office is the one that is going to say, she was frozen or she wasn't. It's not going to be the PD.
No.
Because they're not the pathologists, they're not the doctors. And so ultimately it's going to be what they say scientifically. But I still say, Tony, that body has got to go to a forensic anthropologist. I would think it's already there.
Yeah.
I'd hope so.
See the transfer.
Yeah.
That's just what you do.
That will be very telling once that information finally does come out, as we continue to wait and find out what those experts have to say. With everything being sealed right now, it may be some time, but who knows? There's a lot to this case and a lot of moving parts that keep changing by the day. We'll wrap that up there. Jennifer Coffindaffer, retired FBI special agent. As always, thank you so much for coming on and giving us your insights into these very confusing cases. Your comments, we'd love to hear them. Go ahead, leave them on YouTube. Just search Hidden Killers with Tony Bruschi. That's where you'll find us, and you can weigh in on any of these cases. Be sure to press subscribe while you are there as well. Until next time, for Jennifer, Stacy, and Todd, I'm Tony Bruschi. We'll talk again real soon.
Want more on this case and others? Then press subscribe now and don't miss a moment of true crime coverage from Tony Bruschi and the Hidden Killers podcast.